And I said, well, in the Air Force, it wasn't anything like that. We didn't get to chase hot women and fly jets all the time. We had to do legal work.
This is Basic AF, episode 80. Show notes can be found at basicafshow.com/80. This episode, we're going to be joined by Jim Eagar for a productive discussion on productivity and when and why and should you change apps. What's up, everybody? I'm Tom Anderson. Hope you're doing well. I'm joined, as always, by Jeff Battersby. JB, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well, Tom Anderson. Very well. Still miles deep in snow here in the Northeast. We got probably 24 inches, and it hasn't gotten warm
at all.
So, yeah, no, it has. It's freaking freezing. And as a result, we, the nice thing is nothing's melted, so nothing's slippery. And I did get a snowshoe in last week, which was a major accomplishment.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So, and might go snowshoeing tomorrow, too. Anyway, yeah, doing well. Freezing a little bit, even down here in Jeffrey Dahmer's basement. I'm a little cold. Got a little bit of heat going on. But
is that what I hear in the background? Your heater there? Is that what that is? Is that the blower?
Do you hear noise?
Yeah.
I do hear background noise, but I didn't think that was me.
But
maybe it is. There is I'll sneak out in a second, and there's a. Yeah, I can hear it too. That's weird.
Okay.
Anyway,
that's all right. Doesn't matter. Old man winter continues to brutalize us. That's all.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. And Tom, we've also got a guest this morning, as you've already mentioned. We've got Jim Eagar. Jim Eagar is on the web. The original Mac guy, and we can absolutely get on with the original Mac guy. We're very happy to have you with us. And Jim, we'd like you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be the original Mac guy.
Okay, thanks for the invitation to be here. It's good to meet you guys, and I'm looking forward to talking today. The reason I picked original Mac guy, I guess, was because I owned an original Mac. Back in 1984, I walked into a computer store and there was a Mac. And I sat down in front of it, and within just a couple of minutes, I was being productive on it. I could do things. I remember Mac Write and Mac Paint and some of those programs. So I bought it. And I started using it. At that time, I was a chaplain in the Air Force at Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. And I started using it to produce class materials, advertisements for programs, whatever. And it was so much easier and more beautiful than any of the PC stuff that I had used before that. I had tried to do a thesis prospectus on a doctor friend's PC, IBM PC. And I spent 90% of my time just trying to get the stupid thing to format the way I wanted it to, as opposed to actually working on my thesis prospectus. It was just a pain in the neck. So moving to a Mac was just a total breath of fresh air. And aside from a period where I started using PCs again because the software that I'd been using dropped the Mac and went totally to the PC back in the old days.
Was that work perfect?
No, that was a program specifically for legal sort of things called Amicus Attorney.
Oh, yeah.
They started out on the Mac and then they dropped it, So I moved back to PCs then. And then I bought an iPhone at some point. And it was like, wow, this is really great. And then I got an iPad, and it was like, wow, this is really great. And then I found out that Macs could run PC software at a decent rate, because back in the old days, it was like molasses. It was horrible, the emulation programs.
Right.
But then, I was able to use the Mac. So I had a legal office at that time, and I got rid of the PCs, bought Macs, and we had proprietary software that ran only on PC, but then we could run it on there in parallels as a window at a great speed, and then it generated a Microsoft Word document, which we could edit on the Mac. So it was great.
Nice.
So that's where the name comes from.
Gotcha. So you've got a really interesting background, Jim. And I don't want to, we don't need to go back to forever, like where you were born and when. But would like to hear that because one of the things I thought was really interesting about you is that you've done a lot of things. You mentioned that you were a lawyer, but I think there are some other things along this little road that you've been on. And so I'm just curious to hear a little bit about your bio.
Okay. I'm one of those people that gets interested in something, kind of follows my curiosity. And then I get where I feel like I'm competent at it, and then it gets boring. And then I start looking for something else to do. So that's an overall general thing. So I started out in ministry, joined the Air Force, enlisted in the Air Force in order to get my GI Bill, because by that point I had a child and knew I needed to go back to school. So then I went through went to the Air Force, enlisted in medical admin. Then got out, finished my bachelor's degree, went and got a graduate degree in religion, then went back in the Air Force as a chaplain, did that for about, 15 years or so, 12 years, got out again. That was back in the around 2003. Remember when peace was breaking out all over the world and we weren't going to need a military anymore? All that. Well, anyway, I got out of the Air Force at that point. And then went to law school, transferred to the JAG Corps. You guys know what JAGs are?
Absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, we're opening a Few Good Men on Friday night, which I'm running sound on, which is all about the JAG. So, yeah.
Well, I tell when I used to do marketing talks from my estate planning practice, I would ask, how many people have you seen JAG? The TV program JAG. And I said, well, in the Air Force, it wasn't anything like that. We didn't get to chase hot women and fly jets all the time. We had to do legal work. So
you guys were wild.
Yeah. So I was in the reserves as a JAG the whole time, and then also had a civilian practice, first in family law, which was nasty. And eventually I got out of that and then did estate planning full time. And then the last year and a half that I was in the Air Force Reserve, I was doing 3-4 month tours backfilling for legal offices that have people deployed to Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever. Wow. So I retired about 10 years ago. And since then, I've done a bunch of other stuff. National Park Service part-time ranger. Last year, I was a sheriff's posse shift supervisor for a while in Arizona. Then I started writing blogs. Now I work part-time for David Sparks doing admin support, editing, and that sort of thing. So who knows what's next, right?
Love it.
Yeah, it's great.
And I feel you. I've been very much the same way in my entire life. I started out as a carpenter, spent 3.5 years in ministry, working with guys coming out of prison, mostly. And then went back to being a carpenter, went to college, kind of, and then got married, had a couple of kids, went back to college. So I've done IT work for a very long time, and then have been a writer for a variety of things. So I totally feel that get bored with something, got to move on a little bit of it. It's
right.
I've not been very steady as far as careers are concerned. It's been an all over the map kind of thing, which is interesting to say the least.
Yeah.
So very cool.
And I think fairly normal these days. I think a lot of people do that.
I totally agree with you. There are very few people that I know, and I know a lot of people because of where I live who work for IBM. That used to be a career. You went to IBM and you stayed there your entire life, and you retired from IBM. And
right.
I know very few people for whom that is true any longer. So, yeah, really, really interesting. So that's
I'm
very
the
cool.
Steady Eddie of the group.
Yeah, you are, Tommy.
Yeah, I did 14 years corporate. I did 3 years consulting in between because I got tired of corporate. And then through the consulting, ended up in higher ed doing IT there. And 16 years later here, I'm still there.
Yeah, nice.
Plan to finish there because I'm too old to want to change to something. Well, there's things I want to do, but I don't want to start over like at a new company. And
No, don't blame you.
in corporate, I have no desire to go back to. Like higher ed is like a nice blend of doing just enough. It's actually quite fun being around the students, seeing them, because we have a lot of work studies that come in, and it's fun to see them come in as freshmen and how they develop over their 4 years and then go out and do their thing. So unique environment. I've kind of fallen in love with it. So hope to stay there.
So one of the things Tom said as we were about to meet with you, when we were getting ready before we started recording, is we want to talk a little bit about what it is that you're using Mac-wise and software-wise. So if you would, why don't you tell us what it is that you use, what kind of tools you use?
Okay, I've got a MacBook Pro M4. And I have that hooked into a CalDigit dock, which I actually just got about a month ago because I ran out of spaces for peripherals on the dock that I had before, which was an OWC. And then recently, probably about 2 months ago, I stopped using my 27-inch Apple display and got an Asus 32-inch, which has been great. I mean, when you get the older eyes syndrome,
You know it well.
the extra space makes a big difference because you got to have bigger type on the screen in order to function. So it really cuts into your screen space. So having this 32-inch monitor has just been a really great thing. As far as apps go, since I write two different blog posts, a lot of the apps that I use have to do with my process that I've developed over time for writing. So a lot of times what I do is I will use, let's see, when I start out, I'm using a shortcut to record my thoughts for a blog idea. That goes into Craft. I've got like I say, a shortcut that puts it into Craft and also puts a linked title into a Craft document also. So when I look at that, when I decide the week before what I'm going to write about, then I do a mind map next in MindNode, the app MindNode.
Mm-hmm.
That I find works a lot better for me than trying to outline. I think more visually than I do,
Sequentially.
Sequentially like that. So I move things around and I transfer my initial notes over there and then add a lot more and keep coming back to it during the week. Once I get that where I want it to be, I use whisper memos to dictate into. And what I like about whisper memos is I can dictate and then it gives me the results in paragraphs already, breaks it down into logical paragraphs. Also, you get a summary, but I don't use that very often. Then I transfer that over to Ulysses. That's my primary writing app. So then in Ulysses, I will edit. Then I will move over to, once I get the thing edited and I've got my basic draft, then that's when I bring some AI in to help me do the editing. I used to use ChatGPT until about a week ago when I shifted over to Claude. It just seemed to do better for me. I don't want AI to write for me. I just want it to help me do the editing process, and I'm finding that's really helpful. So that's the app and the program that I'm using for that. So that's aside from the basic stuff, that I use for like, Apple Calendar, Apple Messengers, Apple Mail, Safari, all that kind of stuff. Those are really the main other apps that I'm using.
Okay, interesting. So nice little collection of tools that you're using. You're still on an iPad. Are you doing anything with an iPad or no?
Yeah, I use my iPad a lot. Matter of fact, every morning I start out with my iPad. After I get out and get my cup of coffee, I go and sit on the sofa, and I actually have a morning routine that I have a custom homepage for on my iPad with icons. And that leads me through my morning routine. So I use that. The other main app I use is NotePlan. I use that to primarily set up my day and do my weekly, my monthly, and my quarterly reviews on, because it's already set up to do that. So I will sit and go through these apps that have me do my Readwise readings that I have every morning. Let's see what else. I do some meditation. So I've got a little meditation app that just starts it and ends it after 10 minutes. I've got other apps that I follow. My RSS reader, which is Readwise Reader. And then I use NotePlan to decide out of my task list, which coordinates with Apple Reminders, what do I want to do that day. So I've just started doing the top 3 things I want to do and then putting other things below that. And as I go through the day, then I use that list as my guide, but I don't map out ahead of time what I'm going to do. I tried, a couple of years ago, I tried the very strict time blocking approach, and that didn't work. I don't like it. I don't like that guy I don't like people telling me what to do. And that guy that laid out my day for me, who is he?
Right. I feel you, man.
I just kind of go with my flow and decide what I'm going to work on when I want to work on it and go through my day that way. But all of that starts on my iPad. And I keep my iPad handy all day, because if I want to look up something like the weather, a lot of times if I'm in the living room or something, I'll just pick up my iPad. And then I do all my reading. Unless it's a book I can't get on Kindle, I do all my reading on my iPad also. That's another one of those older eyes things. Also, from the standpoint of I can make the type whatever size I want, and I have good backlighting wherever I am.
Right.
So I use the iPad. I use the iPad a lot.
Yeah, and that Kindle piece is a key component for your Readwise too. So do your highlights there, feeds it in, which you could do that with physical books. You can take pictures. That seems very, very like too much work to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love Readwise, and a lot of times when I'm researching for blog posts now, I will go to that feature they have, Chat with Readwise. I will go to that and find highlights that discuss the same topic my blog thing is on, and then a lot of times I'll use quotes from that in my blog post as well, or it will remind me of different aspects of it. So that's part of my research process now too.
Yeah, that's a great AI implementation. It's one of those specialized things, but I use that too. It's really good. I like that it is really tied into your highlights, because if you read a lot, and we've talked about Snipped on this show too, because I listen to podcasts, and you can take the highlights from the podcast and they end up in Readwise. But after a while, all that stuff kind of runs together. It's just in Readwise. So those emails that they'll send out with your daily Readwise review, I like that. But the AI piece is great, just to go in and resurface specific things. I do a similar process like you do.
Awesome. Which now brings us to, you have a very interesting tech stack. I had to look up several of the items that you were talking about, which is great because you've introduced me to a couple of things. I'm not an AI user really, although Tom swears that with the next implementation of Siri, I'm not going to be able to help myself. I do use Claude. I have occasionally used Claude for some things, and I find that to be better than ChatGPT as well. I just find it to be a more interesting application, but it's rare that I use any of that. But you've introduced me already to a couple of tools like Whisper Memos that I'd be interested in. Tom uses Readwise all the time and has for a long time. I played with it for a little bit and don't see. Same thing with Snipped. I listen to a ton of podcasts, but I almost none of the tools that you mentioned are tools that I was previously aware of. So grateful for that. Which brings us, makes a nice segue to the next point. One of the things that we wanted you on, you had a blog post, which we'll post to, that really was about whether or not you should switch apps that you're using to be able to do the work that you do. So we wanted, we wanted you to talk with us a little bit about what that was. What you put in our notes is 6 tips for evaluating whether or not you should change apps. And so why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because clearly you have a solid app plan for yourself. None of these have I heard of, so it's like, oh, should I check this out? Should I work with this? So why don't you talk to me a little bit? Talk me off the ledge.
Well, part of where this article came from is observing others and myself as well during a period when I kept jumping from one app to another. And it's like, what in the hell is going on here? Why am I doing this? So part of it was self-evaluation and figuring it out and realizing that I was wasting a tremendous amount of time working on learning new apps as opposed to doing the work that the apps was supposed to help me do. So, I got to looking into that, and I wrote an article, I think it was a year or two ago, about the shiny new app syndrome, which kind of hits some of the same points as well. And I think that was my first tip is this just new and shiny? I think a lot of us in the productivity field, a lot of us are introverted nerds, and we're human beings, and as human beings, we are wired to be attracted to the new and shiny. That's just part of who we are, and it's a big part of being human. So, as I was thinking about this podcast, actually, it dawned on me that I don't want to just dish on new and shiny and make it sound like that's a bad thing. It's not. It's what makes life interesting, right? Because we see things and we want to try, we want novelty, we want to try new things, we want to do new things and all of that. That's great. But like everything else in life, it needs some control and some moderation, some temperance. And I think what's happened a lot in the tech world is people become, I don't know what, app hobbyists, and they just jump from one app to another, to another, to another, and everything's just constantly in flux. So this last month, I guess it was I think it was last month that I wrote the blog post. It was, what are some of the things we need to think about before we just jump in and change apps? I don't think it's wrong to change apps. Sometimes it's a good idea. But, to address that first one, I think a lot of times what happens is it's just the new kid on the block and we're fascinated. And it's like, ooh, that looks bright and shiny. I think I'll switch to that. And I think it needs to be a little bit more thoughtful and intentional to keep it from becoming counterproductive as opposed to something that can be productive and actually help us in doing the work that we think is important.
Interesting. Yeah, I had, for a period of time, I was kind of doing the same thing. I would see a new to-do list app or something of that nature, and I would play with it. And actually, Tom, I think you've done the same thing as well. One of our friends, Bill McLean, posted recently a new video, actually, I think it was in the last couple of days, about how he had done the same thing and then now has settled back on, really for himself, and I'm kind of the same way, all the Apple apps. So he uses Notes. We've talked about here and actually had Matthias, the creator of Forever Notes, on. You mentioned the idea of a framework, changing a framework around what it is that you're doing. And that's what Forever Notes did for me for Notes. It made it so Notes kind of got reorganized, even though I was using the same app. So it's really easy to kind of move everything over to a new something. And as Tom points out in our notes, sometimes this is just a form of procrastination. You're finding a way to get out of doing the thing that you actually need to do. You should be writing, but instead, you're folding the laundry. It's that kind of a thing, which, I'm I'm guilty of. I will often go, this looks interesting, and then want to play with that. I know that my brain likes distraction. So,
it's addicted to it, like mine.
Everybody's does.
Yeah, right. I like. Yeah, and more. I think since we've now gotten, phones in our pockets that can distract us easily 1,000 times a day. I really have to put my phone out of reach sometimes when I'm reading or when I'm doing something else, so I don't get inundated. So the second piece of the puzzle that you put here is you said that what problem does the app actually solve? In other words, if you're looking at something new, what's the idea behind that? Again, you've got a pretty solid system, it seems like. What problems did the apps that you're using, or do the apps that you're using, solve for you?
Well, just like with using MindNote would be a good example. I'd used outlining before, and I found it just didn't work. It didn't click as well for me. And when I found mind mapping, it was like, wow, this fits my brain. This works for me. A more tech example would be, for instance, using Craft for keeping track of where my blog posts are in production, and also using a shortcut to record an idea. By the way, I get about 80% of my blog ideas from my Readwise highlights on my iPad in the morning. And then I've got that shortcut link right on my iPad. So I tap that. I put my initial thoughts, maybe save a Readwise quote to it. And then, that goes automatically into Craft. It works every time. Craft makes it easy for me to click on titles and drag them up and down, which I need to do as far as, instead of copying and pasting or something like that, which is a drag. I can just drag it, click on it, and drag them around, and the shortcut works perfectly with Craft. So that's one of my primary uses of Craft, and I use that. And I've tried using some other things, but I've used that and I've stuck with Craft for that purpose because it solves that problem for me. It gives me a way to track my when I'm developing a blog, and it also gives me a great place to store blog ideas and make those easily accessible for me. I've looked at some other apps, and I haven't found anything that does a better job than Craft for that. So I guess if I had a problem that wasn't, was something that wasn't working for me, then I'd want to go out and look and see if there was something else that fixed that. I think what I'm addressing at this point is that by asking what problem does this actually solve, I'm getting to the question, does this really do anything? Is this really functional? Or is it just, I want something new? It kind of goes back to point one, am I doing this just because it's new and shiny? Or is there really a problem that needs to be solved that this app solves? And to me, that's a pretty good question that gets to the core intentionality of picking an app.
Nice. So the other piece of the puzzle that you put in here is anything actually broken? How, the idea to be able to go out and find a new app rather than letting the app find you and then, kind of drive your decision. And I know, Tom, you've kind of hopped on a couple of different things over the years, right? Todoist, Bear, you kind of banged around that way. And I think it's a fair question to ask always, is anything actually broken in my process? In other words, are you feeling friction, and is there some other tool that can alleviate that friction, or are you simply just seeing the new thing? So how would how would have you in your tech life figured out whether or not a process or something else has broken? In other words, how did you come to find that you needed to use Readwise and Craft? Tom's a huge Craft user. I'm not. I use Craft simply for the podcast because that's what Tom's putting that stuff in. He just smirked at me.
I did.
You did. I'm an Apple Notes guy. That's really, and there are reasons for that, and we don't need to get into them here. But how is it that you discover that friction or that broken process that leads you to look for some new app rather than having that app, pop up on the App Store and you go, I should try it?
Yeah. Well, I think it's just where you run into friction points in the processes that you use, and that's going to differ with everybody, right? If you write a blog every week, you're going to have a writing process and a thought iteration process and all of that. If you do a podcast, you're going to be having another sort of process. So I think that it really boils down to where do you have friction points where things don't quite work the way you wish they would, where it slows you down, or I guess you could call them bottlenecks maybe also. I think really with this point, what I was getting at with this, is anything actually broken, is to try and identify, is there really a problem with the app that you have now that's performing this function? And that really leads to the idea of, is it possible that the app that you already have might actually already have the solution in it? I mean, I use DevonThink also, and I know about, maybe 3% of what DevonThink can do. I've gone through David's DevonThink field guide, and I haven't implemented 99% of that because I don't use it. I just don't need it. But I think there's an awful lot of times when we're ready to jump ship and move to another app, when maybe the app that we have can already fix that problem. And we need to spend time, thinking about that and maybe learning more about the app that we have to see if we really do need to move to something different, or if the app that we have can do the job. So that's kind of where I was coming from with that. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of an example, except that when I tried moving from Craft to NotePlan to do the same function, it just created a lot more friction. I couldn't get the shortcut to work properly in NotePlan. When it did, it was hit and miss. When I went to NotePlan and tried to move things back and forth, it didn't work very well. I'd click on it and I'd get some other little dialogue that would come up. And it was like, this is not working. If I had tried to do this in NotePlan initially, it would have been the friction point, and I would have started looking for something else probably. As it were, I had already used Craft, so I just looked at it, tried it, and said, nah, that's not going to work, and went back to Craft and have been completely happy with using Craft for that purpose since that time.
Nice.
You hear that, Jeff?
I did hear.
Excuse me?
Yeah. Ask Jeff if he heard that.
That's
he always
why
breaks me about the Craft. So I gotta take my shots.
I just, it's funny. You say that, for my purposes, and this is really interesting because it's the difference between Tom and me, which you would expect. I tried to jump on Craft. In fact, have a ton of notes in Craft, and did when I was, I did a lot of court work. I was doing, taking notes and doing for municipal and in some cases county courts. We were doing software transitions, so I was doing that. I'd take a lot of notes, and I have a ton of notes in Craft that I took, and it worked wonderfully for that particular thing. But personally, for things that I'm writing or trying to keep track of, or articles that I want to save, it just didn't. It didn't swing it for me. So I went back to to Apple Notes. And again, when Bill McLean was on, he mentioned in an episode that we had, I think it might have been the first episode we had Bill on, he mentioned Forever Notes, and I was like, oh, this looks interesting. And that was a framework that used the existing Notes app, but made it so that you could capture information in a way that you wanted to capture information, organize it very specifically. And that for me was a perfect fit. So I do my day-to-day in Notes. I give Tom grief about craft probably twice a week.
Yeah. It's usually.
Yeah.
Well, I use 4 different notes. I'm sitting here thinking I actually use 4 different notes apps, but all for very different purposes.
Mm-hmm.
I use Craft for my blog writing, blog ideas, and tracking blogs. I use Apple Notes for most of my personal stuff because it's easy when I'm on my phone to get to a note that I need. I use NotePlan primarily for keeping track of my roles and my reviews and planning my day because it works beautifully for that. And what's the other one? DevonThink. I use DevonThink for document storage and like a form of backup as well. And I mean, that's fine. You can do that. You can use different apps for very different purposes. At one time I was into I want to find the one app that rules them all, that kind of a thing. And I don't think that exists for me anyway.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Yeah. People try and make Obsidian that way, but then you got to be a programmer too to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Notion's another one that they try to fit it all in too as well. And I go back and I look at Notion from time to time because they're doing a lot of interesting things. But one of the knocks, at least in the past, I'm not sure its condition right now, is that on mobile it's not the greatest. And I do a lot on mobile devices, so I'm like, I don't know about that. Bill McLean, speaking of him again, he's got this love-hate with Notion. He'll probably come back on the show and talk about it. He and I go back and forth in messages on apps a lot too. But and I agree with you. Like my history with apps, I was an Evernote user when that first came out back 2007 or 8, whatever that was. Used that all the way up to 2020. Used that through the business I ran, and then when I switched over to education, I kind of kept everything in there. So I had 12 years of notes in there. They kind of lost their way, and I got tired of that, and so I left to go into Craft in 2020. I think is when that came out, and so I used that for a bit. Got my notes imported from Evernote into that. And that worked well for a few years, and they were still trying to figure out their business, and they started to take this approach that they were going to be a Google Docs competitor and started pushing enterprise business. And I think so when they did that, I was like, wow, I'm not really interested in like all of that sharing and everything. So I jumped into Bear Notes for a while, which is a really beautiful app and works pretty well. But one thing that I like to do a lot is use the Apple Pencil when I'm working on ideas and planning and thinking things through. And the way that Bear implemented the note-taking on the iPad just got to be too much because it would give you like a tiny portion of the screen would be like, you have the whole screen that you could write on, like full screen notes, like you could write, but in Bear it would only take up maybe 60%. And so you're stuck in this little box. And that ended up irritating me. But then along the way too, Craft kind of course corrected, and now they just want to be like the best personal knowledge management platform, productivity platform, whatever you want to call it. And they've so I got back in with them. I do use Notes a little bit. Like you've got some shared notes with family and stuff like that, and it's good for that. On the task side of things, I used OmniFocus back in the day for quite a few years, switched over to Things around 2013 or 14, used that for a long, long time. Right now, I'm still experimenting with tasks and Craft. I'm going to stick with that probably through the summer. They've got some new things coming. Right now, it's falling short in some places right now. It's not very mature, but they're they've got some plans. So I want to ride that through and see where it comes out and stick with it there. But I still have some stuff in reminders because you can't beat, the ease of getting something in through Siri when it works. And so that I have got some stuff in there and shared lists there too with the family for, vacation planning and, grocery lists and stuff like that. But I've tried to stay fairly consistent. Like I haven't moved around a lot, and I do download some apps. Like if something looks interesting, and I might check it out just to see if it has any potential. Like there's a new app or newish, Capacities is one that's kind of like a productivity nerds, playground as well. I've resisted that. Like I mentioned, Notion, but there are a bunch. There's one on iPad, and it's on Mac too, but I looked at it mostly on iPad. It's called Structured, and it's like a day planning app. And I didn't settle with it. I got a year subscription with it a couple of years ago to look at it. But one of the things that I thought it did really well, and it was early in AI, so this is probably 18 months ago maybe, you would just talk to it and you would say, today I need to go to the doctor, I want to work on this, I need to take the dog out, take him to the vet, go to the dentist, whatever. And it would just add it to the calendar. Like you didn't have to type them in and all that kind of stuff. So that was like one of the specific like AI implementations early on that I thought was pretty good. It wasn't just a chat bot. And so I looked at that, and it's very popular. But I didn't end up sticking with that. So I feel you, Jim. I've jumped around a little bit myself. Where you mentioned earlier that you switched as of last week from ChatGPT to Claude. I am considering making a move. Like ChatGPT is my primary. We use Google Workspace at the office. So I've been using Gemini more there. I've got the Pro license there, but I also have Pro license on my personal account where they gave a promo. You could get it free for 18 months or something. And they've come a long way with how well that works. So I'm kind of evaluating it. What process did you go through when you were considering making that change to kind of measure them up side by side to say, okay, well, I really think now's a good time to make the move?
Well, I used ChatGPT for probably about a year. And I tried using Claude and a couple of others and didn't care for it. It just didn't fit me until recently. And what I did basically was in my editing process, I have some snippets on Alfred that ask standard questions, for editing when I wanted AI to give me suggestions for headlines and section headings, that sort of thing. And what I did is I brought up my free account in Claude and I brought up my regular paid ChatGPT account and I asked the same questions in both. And this was a couple, through the process of a couple of blogs. And I found that consistently, the answers that I was getting in Claude were more, I don't know, I won't use the word thoughtful because AI doesn't think. but
Well
they
put.
were, but they were more insightful, I guess would be the word for me. They fit me better. And I think this is the kind of thing that what works for me is not going to work for somebody else. They're going to find something that works better for them. I think all of the major LLMs now are great. They do good stuff. But when I was using Claude, I would get more ideas like, well, okay, this is good, but have you thought about doing so and so with it? As far as a revision or something, or maybe a personal story would fit here, to keep interest and that sort of thing. Sometimes it would be, have you thought, here's something to consider. Have you thought about this? Which would be another concept to bring in. And here's the reason why, which I found really helpful. And then I could look at it and evaluate it and say, nah, I don't want that in there. Or, yeah, that's a good idea. And then I go back to my draft and write it in. So I just basically use the same questions that I use in ChatGPT and in Claude and consistently Claude was winning that battle for me. So that's kind of the process I used anyway. So
Okay.
now I made the decision to switch over to Claude then as my paid uh, one that I'd regularly use.
Yeah, going through a similar process because I did the reader survey and the newsletter last couple times I sent it out, and got a decent number of responses. And so I would run that through and as kind of an analysis. And so I actually ran it through similar like you did. I ran it through ChatGPT and then in Gemini to see, the exact same prompts in both to see the differences. And I think Gemini's was a bit better on that project, but both were good. But the Gemini has some more specific answers, and it was a little bit better, like you said, with Claude coming back and saying, well, maybe consider X, Y, Z, whatever. I did find in ChatGPT, and I need to try this in Gemini too. Like I've built a project that I've trained to be kind of a similar thing, almost like an editor of sorts. So when I do the newsletters, I'll throw it in there. Because I don't consider myself much of a writer. I'm more of a hacker. And so I just hack stuff together. But I put it in there, though, to say, look at the context. Does it, am I providing enough context around it so that it kind of makes sense? Am I putting in acronyms and not explaining what it is in case people don't know? I'm just assuming maybe they know what these nerdy acronyms are, but they may not, and stuff like that. So I need to go over to Gemini and try to, see how that works there, too, because they have the gems now that you can do a similar thing with.
All righty. We're coming up against time, but I do have one other question for you, Jim. And that is, so you made a change from ChatGPT to Claude. When did you do that? Was it at the beginning of the year?
No, that was about a week ago.
A week ago. All right. Close enough. Still in the first month.
That's when I made my final decision and canceled my ChatGPT paid account and signed up for a paid Claude account. By the way, it's $3 cheaper a month if you get the year.
Okay, that's nice. So one of the things that you said that you try to stick to, and this comes from David Sparks, and I just want you to talk about it a little bit as it relates to your jump from ChatGPT to Claude. What David Sparks recommends is only making major app switches once a year. He says during the week between Christmas and New Year's. Why don't you explain some of the rationale behind that and why you think that's a good idea?
Well, I think the concept is good, especially for people who have a habit of constantly switching major apps, multiple times during the year, because it puts some control in place. It puts some guardrails up, so to speak, to where you say, no, okay, I can look at it, I can experiment with it, but I can't make any major decisions until, and you can set the time frame. David said it between Christmas and New Year's. And actually, he's even gone over that a bit this year. I noticed he just put out a blog this morning in which he talks about his tech stack. And some of those decisions weren't done final until last week. Okay. So he's even broken his own rule a bit. But I think as a good guardrail, if you've got, all of us have to look at ourselves. If you've got a tendency to jump from one thing to another constantly, this is a good way to put some guardrails on it and keep that from happening by just saying, okay, I only make major changes once a year during this time frame. Again, I broke the rule. He broke the rule this time. But he'd been working with these things, and what happened actually is he got into a thing on the McSparky Labs, and people brought up some points that he hadn't considered about this app he was considering. And then it was like, oh, now I got to rethink this.
Yeah. Well, and that brings, one of the other points that you made is, it's a framework. It's not it's not a set of hard and fast rules. It's not the 10 Commandments. It's something slightly more open than that and should be flexible, but generally as a rule makes a great point.
Yeah, and I think I think as you spend more time in the productivity realm and you get to know yourself better, things change. I still see a new app and think, ooh, that looks interesting,
Of course.
but I'm not as inclined to jump for it as I was a few years ago. And I think part of this is you guys, I'm sure, have noticed that there's kind of a movement been going on to simplify tech stacks and to back off of what some people call toxic productivity, where
Yeah.
people get wrapped up in it and all of that. And frankly, I think this thing about jumping from app to app to app constantly is kind of a part of that also. People wanting to get more control of the process and not just get caught up in it. So this is what he uses and some other people use. And if someone thinks it would work and help them, if they feel like they've got an app gambling problem, maybe
An app gambling problem.
I'm Tom, and I love
this
apps.
is the way to get control of that. You only go to the casino once a year.
Appers Anonymous.
Block the app store on your device.
Yeah.
Give your family member the passcode to unlock it.
That's right.
An intervention on apps. That's good.
I like that. So, Jim, we're really grateful you came on. Why don't you tell us where we can find you in the online world?
Well, I've got two things that I write. One is originalmacguy.com. And that is about healthy productivity. What else do I say I do in there? Life wisdom, because I kind of stray into other areas like mindfulness, meditation, and things like that. And then the other area of interest that I've had for the last couple of years is retirement transition, because I went through it and it was a mess. So I'm trying to help other people with that. So I've got another blog called retirereinvented.com. So on both of those blogs, I usually post a blog once a week. Original Mac Guy comes out on Tuesdays, and Retirement Reinvented comes out on Saturdays. So if you're interested in one of those topics, that's where to go.
Excellent. Really appreciate that. Again, thanks for spending time with us. We're really grateful. For those of you who listen regularly, you know that you can get us at feedback@basicafshow.com. That is one place to find us. Inside the notes in whatever you're listening to this podcast on, there are links both to feedback@basicafshow.com, and you could contact us directly. Practically leave us a voicemail message if you want to. And as always, music for our show, Psychokinetics, Celsius 7. Grateful to them every single time that we pop that music on. And then Randall Martin Design for our show logo and artwork.
All right. Excellent. Thank you for the closeout there, Jeff. Jim, it was a pleasure. I had a great time.
Oh, thanks.
And, we'd love to have you come back sometime.
I had fun. Yeah. You guys are fun to talk with. I enjoyed it.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And like I said, we'd love to get you back sometime. Maybe this summer, perhaps, if schedules work out. We could look at that. Listeners, if you wouldn't mind, we would greatly appreciate it if you could leave us a review or just give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or just tell your friends. Pass it along. We'd be very appreciative of that as well. Want to thank each and every one of you for hanging out with us. As we've said a bunch of times, lots of places to get content like this, and we are honored that you would choose to spend some time with us. We really appreciate it. So that's going to wrap up this episode of Basic AF, and we will talk to you again in a few weeks. So see you then.
See ya.
Your imperfections do